Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Authority's Board's Finance and Audit Committee meeting for November the 18th, 2021. Thank you for joining us. This morning, we will bring the meeting to order, and Mr. Secretary, please call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chair Richards.
Here.
Director Camacho.
Here.
Vice Chair Miller.
Here.
Director Gallimetti.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, all members of the Finance and Audit Committee are here, present.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And if you will now give the public the information necessary to allow them to address this committee.
Thank you. Good morning, all, and welcome to the California High-Speed Rail Finance and Audit Committee meeting. Today, we are hosting this meeting remotely via Zoom. In a moment, we will take public comment. First, we want to run through some important technical aspects of this meeting for offering public comment. If you are logged into this meeting via the Zoom application, please use the raise your hand feature, which is typically located at the bottom of your screen, so that I may call on you to provide your comment. If you're dialing in by phone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue. Speakers will be called in the order that their hand is raised. Once you've been in the queue and your name is called, in the web meeting, please click the prompt on your screen to allow your microphone to be unmuted. On the phone, we will call on you by the last 4 digits of your phone number. At that point, you'll hear a message that you're being unmuted. Once unmuted, it will be your turn to speak. Please slowly and clearly say and spell your first and last name, and if applicable, state the organization you represent. After your introduction, each speaker is allotted 2 minutes to provide their comment. I will interject at 1 minute and 45 seconds to provide a 15-second warning. Our court reporter is on the line to record these comments. If they need you to spell or repeat something, they may interject. I will notify you when your time is nearly up. At the end of your comment, we will disable your microphone. However, you are welcome to stay on the line to continue watching or listening to the meeting. If you do not wish to provide a comment and simply want to watch the meeting, you can do so by logging on to hsr.ca.gov and looking for the link to our live stream. For the member of the public who just joined by telephone, pressing #2 will raise your hand and put you into our queue for providing public comment if you wish to. Mr. Chairman, all the attendees have heard the instructions for providing public comment and none have motioned to raise their hand to provide public comment.
All right, thank you, Mo. With that, ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome. And we will begin today's meeting with the approval of the October 21st Finance and Audit Committee meeting minutes. Okay, thank you.
Second.
Okay, we have motion by Director Camacho, second by Director Gallimetti. All in favor?
Aye.
And I'm going to abstain. As you recall, I was not at that meeting, and Vice Chair Miller chaired the Finance and Audit Committee last month.
I'd just like to point out that she did a wonderful job.
You know what? I heard part of it, and
It's a lot smoother than our regular chair.
I concur with you. She may be permanently in that position sooner than later.
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's move on. So,
All right, we'll move on at this point with my comments. And the only comment I'm going to make for those in the public, as you probably have read in the board agenda for today, ladies and gentlemen, we have a Central Valley update, a construction update report in the board meeting, and therefore we're going to pass over the Central Valley update in the Finance and Audit Committee meeting because the information here obviously is very similar to the information that you'll hear in the board meeting, which begins this morning at 11 o'clock. And with that, we'll move on to agenda item number 3, which is the pre-award review that was conducted by our audit committee, internal audit committee. And with us is Paula Rivera, our chief auditor. Good morning, Paula.
Good morning. I'm Paula Rivera, and I'm here today to brief you on a pre-award review that we've done of a proposed contract for the historic Fresno station seismic and accessibility renovations. A pre-award is done whenever a contract is awarded based on qualifications and not price. So we review the cost proposal and the draft agreement, and we provide recommendations to the contract manager for their use during negotiations. All recommendations will be implemented prior to executing the contract. So we've found that we look at three main types of costs: direct labor, indirect costs, and other direct costs that have been proposed by the prime and their subs. We found one indirect rate was overstated. A couple other little things about filling out the form, the cost proposal form. We found a few direct labor rates that were misstated or that need to be updated based on current conditions. And we also found some things to just clean up the cost proposal for the other direct costs. This information has been provided to the contract manager. He's reviewed it and will be having the consultants revise their cost proposals throughout the negotiation process, and as I said, prior to executing the contract. Are there any questions?
Questions for Paula? I just have a couple of then, Paula. With regards to this process on a pre-award review, this occurs, I believe, for all pre-awards where we're starting out with what would be more similar to a request for qualifications, and then there's a selection, and then when there is a selection of the party that you're then going to negotiate with. Is this pre-award then? This pre-award review is done every time we have a situation like that. Is that correct?
Yes. Each time there's an RFQ, a pre-award is performed.
Okay. And before it comes to you and you review all of this, has this already been reviewed by the contract manager?
It's a simultaneous review. They are reviewing it for general form for what has been proposed in preparation for negotiations, while we're reviewing it for compliance with the federal regulations and with the agreement provisions. So it's done concurrently.
Do we generally see these many issues when you're looking at a pre-review? Is this reasonably common?
Yes, the things we found are very common and quite unremarkable. Many of them would have been caught during negotiations if we didn't have a pre-award, because the two things are being performed concurrently, but we report everything we find just to aid the contract manager in their negotiations.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Paula. Since there are no other questions, thank you very much. And thank you for the good job as you always do in your department. You're welcome to stay with us, or we'll catch up with you at the board meeting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Chairman Richard, one question for Paula.
Yes,
I'm
Paula,
sorry.
hang on.
Yes.
That you only do this pre-award audit on a RFQ, but on RFP, they include price.
Yes.
So you don't do this pre-award review?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. Thank you again. Moving on to item number 4 on our agenda is the executive summary from our Chief Financial Officer. Good morning, Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Today I'm joined by our Assistant Chief Financial Officer, Natalie Daniel. Natalie's been with us almost a year. She comes to us with fairly broad experience. She was most recently at the State Department of Consumer Affairs as a deputy director overseeing all administration and fiscal issues. And that department, by the way, has, I think, what is it, Natalie, overall 20 to 30 boards and bureaus that protect consumers, such as the medical board and others. So she's
37.
There you go, 37 boards and bureaus. So one board is a piece of cake, right? Natalie also was at the State Judicial Council, where she oversaw some capital outlay fiscal issues, such as work courthouse construction and things of that nature, and also started, I believe, at the state with the Department of Finance. So Natalie's kind of my backup for these presentations, and I told her, to be prepared at any time to jump in and brief the board if I was sick or otherwise unavailable on a certain board meeting day. So after preparing for the past 5 or 6 board meetings, we thought we'd share this presentation so that she has a real on the ground training, if you will, on presenting our high-speed rail fiscal information. So she's going to present most of the information today, and we'll both be available for questions.
Thank you, Brian. And for members of the committee, as we go through each of the pages, please make any questions or comments you have at that time so that we don't have to do it at the end of it, and it'll be more in context with what has just been said. So Natalie, welcome aboard again, and you're on.
Thank you. And thank you, Brian, for the nice introduction. I appreciate it. Good morning, Mr. Chair and board members. My name is Natalie Daniel, and I'm the Assistant Chief Financial Officer. As Brian mentioned, this is my first F&A meeting, so I'm excited to meet with you and have the opportunity to present. This morning, I'll be briefing you on the November executive summary, and that covers data through September 30th. So starting with the first slide here, this slide has 2 reports, the first of which is the Accounts Payable, Aging, and Disputes report. And this is essentially a report that summarizes our monthly invoice processing. I'm happy to report that first, we did not have any late payments in the month of September, and this brings us to a new record high of 56 months where we have not incurred any late payments as defined by the state's Prompt Payment Act. And secondly, I'd like to note that we also did not have any aged invoices in the month of September. If you go to the second row, you can see our dispute summary, and we are tracking $53.6 million in disputed invoices for contractors, which is about the same as last month. Moving on to the second half of the page, we have our cash management report. And this is a report that summarizes the cash balances that we have in each of our 3 funds. So starting at the top row, if you look at the Proposition 1A bond fund, on the right-hand column, you can see that the current fund balance is coming in at approximately $115.6 million. And this reflects a net change of about $9.6 million from the prior month. And the changes are made up primarily of expenditures for state operations and also bookend expenditures for the Caltrain project. Moving to the second row, we have our cap and trade cash balance, and that's coming in at approximately $1.7 billion, which again is a slight decrease from last month. I'd like to note, though, that we're still waiting to post our August 2021 auction results, which had recorded a record high for us of $252 million. And as we've noted in previous meetings, we do tend to have a little bit of a delay in posting auction results. We have to wait for the Department of Finance and the State Controller's Office to take some administrative actions before we can actually recognize the cash. And in the case of the August auction, the administrative work was completed on October 5th. So just outside of the reporting period for today, but this cash will show up next month at the next board meeting. And additionally, I'm sure you're all tracking that we had another cap and trade sale yesterday, which was November 17th. And it takes us a week to get preliminary results from a sale. So we expect to have some new information on the 24th, and we'll be able to share that with you as soon as it's available. I also wanted to note that yesterday's auction was similar to the last 2 auctions in that it included some additional allowances that had been unsold previously due to COVID last year. And this auction will finalize our catch-up in terms of selling those unsold allowances that were remaining from last May and August of 2020. So the addition of those unsold allowances, we believe, will result in another better than average auction for this sale. And then the last row here, we'll move to our rail property management fund. And that has remained steady at $11.1 million. This fund, of course, receives lease revenue related to parcel ownership. And over the last few years, our cash balance in this fund has steadily grown. But we're expecting to start to be able to draw down on the cash balance beginning this year. This is a result of our current year expenditure authority being amended recently by $3.25 million by SB.
I'm just ready to go.
By SB 170, which was a bill that recently amended the 2021 Budget Act in September. So this increase in expenditure authority will allow us to pay for a wider scope of property management related costs that otherwise would have been funded by our cap and trade fund. So this will reduce some pressure on the cap and trade fund for items such as property maintenance, repairs, security, and cleanup. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, I missed one part of that. So where did the $4 million appropriation come from?
There was a additional bill that was passed in September. It was called SB 170.
170, okay.
Yeah, it served as a budget bill junior that amended the 2021 Budget Act.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Moving to the next slide, please. So this is our administrative budget and expenditures report, which shows our spending for state operations costs. And in the first row, you'll see that our budget remains at $91.1 million for the September reporting period. And this is what we've reported the last couple of months. This does include the SB 170 adjustments that I just mentioned on the last slide. And we don't anticipate any additional changes in our budget here until the governor releases his annual state budget update in January. So that number will remain constant. Our monthly expenditures are also constant as of now, and they're running steady at $4.5 million, which is the same as what we experienced last month. And this puts our expenditure rate for the year at about 14.4%, which is slightly below the rate of fiscal year completion at 25%. But this is due largely to salary savings from vacant positions, which is what I'll go over next. The bottom half of the chart here does address position changes. And if you look at the second row under the gray line, you can see that a year ago, we had 222 positions filled. And now we're cruising in at 283. So that represents a steady gain and a total net gain over the year of 61 positions in the last 12 months. Next slide, please. This slide is our form to function slide. And I like to think about it as a visualization of movement from consultant staff to state staff over time. So it tells a little bit of a story if you move from left to right. And looking at the top of the chart there on the left column, you can see that in fiscal year 18-19, we started out with 226 total authorized state staff and 450 authorized consultant positions. And through form to function changes over time, we've incremented to the information that's on the right side of the chart in the green column there of 429 state staff and 241 consultants. So essentially over the last few years, we've flip-flopped our ratios between the two. And if you look at the fiscal year 21-22 column, you can see that our current fill rates are marching toward our goal in green there. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, we have 283 current filled positions out of our authorized 429, and our rail delivery partner is showing 289 full-time position equivalents out of 344.
Are the 55 vacant positions under the RDP, are they positions that are not going to be filled, or are they actively working on filling them?
I think it's a bit of a a moving target in a sense, because the RDP positions are calculated by determining a 3-month moving average, and it's based on hourly usage that the RDP is logging. So a lot of times the RDP staff are not working full-time, or they work different number of hours. And so when we are comparing them, we're using full-time equivalents, which is assuming a full-time position hour base.
Mhm. Okay, so I guess they're going to show vacant, they're being utilized, and if they've worked enough, then it'll show a reduction in that number if they became a full-time equivalent for a month, but then it may go the other direction the following month.
Right. It's real time, just like the state positions.
I see.
But because we have fluctuations with holidays and things like that, we do tend to take a 3-month average just
Right.
to level it out and give it a more consistent feel. So you don't see the abnormal fluctuations due to things like the Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Sure. Next slide, please. This next slide is our capital outlay budget summary, and it shows our capital project expenditures for the month. In the top row there, you can see that our fiscal year allocation for 21-22 remains at $2.3 billion. And the capital expenditures for the month of September came in at about $65.6 million, as compared to our preliminary estimate that we provided in last month's flash report, which was 72.5. So this represented a reduction of about $7 million. But if you recall, the flash report that we present is a preliminary look at what we anticipate capital outlay costs to be for the next month at a point in time. So it does make some assumptions, and sometimes actual final invoices come in at a lower amount due to unexpected updates. And in our current case in September, that was the case for DB expenditures for CP23. Those came in a little bit lower than anticipated due to a change order that was expected to be executed prior to the final invoice, but was not. And due to that adjustment and other factors, the DB invoice for September was lower than typical for CP23 this month and came in at $6.7 million. But I will, at the end of this presentation, present another flash slide update that would represent the month of October. And that's showing the CP23 design build invoice for October expected to come in at $24 million, which is more typical.
Yeah, Natalie, a quick question. You mentioned that the expenditures for CP23, the difference in the number was because of a change order. So what we're including in this number are not just construction costs for that month, but also a change order for the past.
And I might jump in on that one if I could. For most change orders, they define future work. There are some cases that contractors have done some work at risk. And in those cases, if the work's already been completed, the change order can be paid at that time because, again, the work's in the past. We don't pay for future work. We pay for work already completed.
Right. Yeah, but when we see the numbers for the month, it was not necessarily for work done that month.
Well, in this case, if it's a change order that has to do with work done in the past, it's possible that work was in the reporting month, or in some cases, it might have been the prior 2 months or maybe 3 months.
I guess what I'm trying to distinguish is that we don't double count for work that has been completed. Let's just say if it were in June, 50% of the work was done in June. Did we pay them any of that amount in June?
No.
And so we don't, and nor do we take credit for that ongoing construction.
That's correct. Yeah. So we would have, some of our disputes, as we've talked about, have been in the case of contractors submitting work that has to do with change orders that aren't executed yet, and we reject those or dispute those. So yeah, we would not show a double payment of this work.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, generally, I mean, on looking at monthly expenditures, we're probably looking at expenditures for invoices probably from the previous month anyway, right? Because I mean, we're not looking at something, you're not paying on the last day of the month for work that had been done that month. You're probably paying during the course of the month for work that was done in a previous month.
The contractors would love that though, Tom.
Yeah, I know they would. They
Yeah,
fight it all the time.
the cycles, typically the invoice for the prior month comes in 2 weeks or so into the new month.
Yeah,
And then it's reviewed. Our Prompt Payment Act requires payment in 45 days of a
right.
undisputed invoice. So, yeah, often, and we'll get the invoice in following month, pay it the month after that.
Right. Anything else on that, Ernie?
One last thing, since Brian mentioned the disputed invoices, we are currently paying all of our invoices within the allotted Prompt Payment Act. But if in fact there is a disputed invoice, that's pulled out of that cycle, and we may end up paying them 120, 180 days later when in fact the dispute is then satisfied, correct?
That's correct. And so if it's a disputed invoice, as you say, the Prompt Payment Act deadline does not apply.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. Go ahead, Natalie.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and move to some of the bullets here. If we break down construction by the construction package numbers, we see that total CPs equaled $54.5 million this month. And that represents a breakdown of CP1 at 19.8 million, CP23 at 15.1 million, and CP4 at 19.7 million. If we break that down further into design build monthly expenditures, that totaled $32.8 million. And the breakdown of that between the CPs was for CP1, 13.5 million, CP23, 6.7, and CP4 at 12.6. And looking at the table below, you can also see that our monthly expenditures for this month focused in construction and project development areas. So next slide, please. This next slide is our capital outlay budget summary, and the top half of this shows our capital project expenditures for the month. Oh, I'm sorry. This shows our total accumulated project expenditures for the project starting from July of 2006 to now, and this includes both capital and support operations expenditures. So the total expenditures to date are in the first column there for $8.8 billion. And looking on the right side of the slide, you can see that that's broken down by different categories. So the majority of our expenditures are in construction at 76%. Next is project development coming in at 15%. And then the remaining 9% is a balance of local assistance and support funding in state operations. The second half of this slide here is our state match to ARA chart. And we don't have a lot of new activity here. We've remained in a maintenance mode for the last couple months because we have fully submitted $2.5 billion that was needed to meet our state obligation match. And the federal government has so far approved about $2.1 billion so far. This is represented in column B there. So as of September, we are currently awaiting the approval of $355.8 million, which we anticipate soon. And the only change in this chart over last month is really in that column C. We had submitted an additional $6.1 million as an increase, which represented a small new maintenance invoice submittal. So at the end of our report, I'll be covering an update for this ARA state match information in the flash report, and I will be speaking to a new update in terms of approvals. So the number in the $2.1 billion in column B will be updated on the flash at the end of the report to be $2.4 billion. Moving to the next slide. So this is our contracts and expenditures report, and this outlines our contract and purchase order numbers and totals. In looking at the first row there, you can see the number of contracts went up slightly this month, just a bit at 201 versus 198, and the value of our contracts also increased a little bit to 8.523, which is an increase of about $15 million. The other item that we tend to highlight on this report is our small business utilization rate, and that's represented in the last row of the chart there. And you can see in this case, we've landed at 23.2%, which is a slight increase to where we were over a year ago. And the difference there would be about 2.2% increase over the year. I'd like to note the last bullet on the page here as well, and that represents our total number of small businesses. Last month, if you recall, there was an informational board item that was regarding the authority's small and disadvantaged business program, with the goal of bringing a future action item to the board regarding possible revisions to the program. But for now, our tracking continues as it has in the past, and we are showing 638 small businesses and 210 disadvantaged business enterprises and 72 disabled veteran business enterprises. So moving to the next slide, please. This brings us to the last formal slide on our report, which represents our contingency use reporting relative to the 2019 baseline. So the primary benefit from this slide, I think, is really the top half of the chart. And in looking at it, you can see project contingency updates for each of the CPs. So, for example, the current CP1 remaining balance is $259 million, and that represents a September drawdown of about $6.2 million in change orders. The remaining CP23 balance is $212 million, and that represents a drawdown of $4.8 million. The remaining CP4 balance is $84 million, and that represents a drawdown of $4.7 million. So that brings the total CP contingency changes for the month of September to total $16 million. And that's reflected in the far right column there under the total balance, and also in the second row of the bottom chart. In moving to the bottom chart, I'd like to note that we had no change orders to report over our $25 million threshold this month, which is why that first row there is blank. And there was no additional activity in any of the other contingency areas. So moving to our last slide, please. So this is our flash report, and this is the add-on slide that I've referenced a couple times. This serves as a preliminary report of what we are anticipating for next month at the F&A meeting. So essentially, this is a preview of highlights that we expect based on the month of October. And of course, these numbers are subject to change because they're based on a preliminary understanding of invoices and program updates. So a bit of a point in time estimate, I suppose. And the top chart really focuses on our capital outlay expenditure summary. In looking at CP expenditures, that's coming in at $62.8 million. And a subcomponent of that then is the DB packages coming in at $45 million. And total capital expenditures, including other work, would be at $111 million anticipated for October. In moving to the lower part of the slide there, you can see on the left the administrative position summary update, and that is showing an increase in 3 positions in terms of the fill rate there on the second row, and that would drop our vacancy rate from 34 to 33.3%. And then lastly is the state match to ARA update that I had mentioned before. So we had gotten an FRA approval on October 1st, where the FRA had approved an additional $315 million worth of our invoices. So we've reflected those updates here in the last column, increasing the state match approved from 2.1 billion to 2.4, and also dropping the state match submitted to the $40.9 million. So in total, we're over 99% complete in terms of our FRA submittals for the ARA match, and we only need approximately $16 million more to go to fully meet our match requirement. And we will, of course, provide actual numbers for all of these updates next month. And this concludes the executive summary update. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. A good job. Any other questions for Natalie? All right. Well, hearing none, you must have done a great job. Thank you for being with us. And I guess we're going to move Brian Annis to a little bit less than a full-time employee here.
I was going to ask if I can come back next month.
Thank you, Natalie.
Great job, Natalie.
Thank you.
We can't afford you next month, Brian.
You know, Tom, this is two women that have taken the positions and have acted as the reporting authority. I mean, maybe there's something to that. The best man for a job is a woman.
I think you've got it correct, Ernie. Thanks.
Thanks, Natalie. Good job.
All right. As I mentioned earlier, we're not going to do the Central Valley update in F&A. We will be getting a more in-depth report on the Central Valley construction update in the board meeting today at 11 o'clock. So any comments from any committee members at this point? Seeing none, then ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. This will conclude the business of the Finance and Audit Committee meeting for November the 18th. Please join us at 11 o'clock this morning for the board meeting of the California High-Speed Rail Authority. And the committee meeting is now adjourned.